Olá, bom dia a todos. Good morning, all of you. I'm Carla Duarte, Institutional Relations Director at CEBRl, the Brazilian Center for International Relations. I'm very pleased to be here today. I'd like to welcome our panelists and to thank them for joining us today. This initiative is part of our Europe program that is coordinated by Dr. Ronaldo Veirano and Professor Ana Paula Tostes, who are both here with us today. The event will examine and discuss Brexit and its impacts, its implications for Brazil-UK bilateral relations. So it's a very timely and very necessary debate. I wish you all a very rich, very fruitful discussion. And I'll now pass the floor to Dr. Ronaldo Veirano, who will make a proper introduction to our subject. Thank you all again.
Thank you very much, Carla. Good morning and a warm welcome to our distinguished guests, Ambassadors Peter Wilson, UK Ambassador to Brazil, Rubens Barbosa, former Ambassador of Brazil to the UK and the United States of America, and Professor Andrew Hurrell, Professor of International Relations at Oxford University. He will be formally introduced by Ana Paula Tostes, Senior Fellow and the main driving force in CEBRl's Europe Group's activities. I would also like to extend our warm welcome greetings to our audience located in Brazil and abroad. Thank you very much for joining today's program. My name is Ronaldo Veirano, and in addition to being a member of CEBRl's Board of Trustees, I am the coordinator for CEBRl's Europe's group. The Brazilian Center for International Relations, CEBRl, is an independent think tank which contributes to establishing an international agenda for Brazil. For the last 21 years, the institution has engaged in promoting pluralistic and proposal-oriented debates on the international landscape and Brazilian foreign policy. CEBRl prioritizes themes with the greatest potential to leverage the international insertion of Brazil in the global economy, proposing pragmatic solutions for the formulation of public policies. CEBRl's work was recognized by the University of Pennsylvania top global think tank ranking, which considered the institution the second best think tank in South America and Central America in 2019. The Europe Group is one of the 12 regional and thematic groups currently operating within CEBRl. The group's activities are implemented by Ana Paula Tostes, to whom we owe a great debt of gratitude for all her hard work. The group is also very fortunate to count with the invaluable mentorship of Ambassador Marcos Galvão, Brazil's ambassador to the European community based in Brussels and a member of CEBRl's Board of Trustees. The group's purpose is to deepen the dialogue and formulate proposals for the relationship between Brazil and Europe and devise possible paths for a more dense and profitable partnership. The objectives of the group are, among others, to follow the Mercosur-EU trade agreement, the advances for transition to digital Europe, the European Green Deal, in addition to addressing the relationship between the EU and the UK post-Brexit, and the relationship between Brazil and key European partners, including, of course, the UK. This is the third event organized by the Europe Group, and will explore the impact of Brexit on Brazil's UK bilateral relations. It happens at a very auspicious moment, as it takes place a few months after the approval, last January 9, by the UK Parliament of the agreement reached with the European Union for the UK to leave the EU. Brazil and the UK have had a historical relationship. In different times of the economic development of Brazil, British investments and trade between the countries were substantially relevant until the Second World War. British presence in Brazil was very significant in many sectors of the Brazilian economy. After the war, the relative weight of that presence diminished considerably, and perhaps Now is a propitious time for the two countries to pursue a more ambitious investment and trade agenda, which could be highly beneficial to both Brazil and the UK. We are extremely fortunate to have been able to assemble such a distinguished panel to discuss this and other impacts Brexit may have on the bilateral relations between Brazil and the UK. Without further ado, I am now pleased to turn the floor over to my colleague, Ana Paula Tostes, who will moderate this event and will formally introduce the renowned panelists. Ana Paula, the floor is yours. You are on mute.
Sorry, technical problem. Technical problems here. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Can you hear now? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. So good morning, good afternoon, Ronaldo, Carla. Thank you for your words. I would like to welcome you all, our honored guests, as well as people from the audience for joining us. So my name is Ana Paula Tostes. I'm senior to have this discussion today. We will debate about the impact of Brexit on bilateral relations between Brazil and United Kingdom. I would start saying that it was more 2016 when British people have decided to leave the European Union. So there was a long time for transition and negotiations until about 20 years ago, when we saw the approval of the trade and cooperation agreement between United Kingdom and the European Union by the European Parliament. Now, British leaders said this was the final step on a long journey to leave the EU. And now they say it's time for global Britain. So now the UK goes freely to new partnerships. So the big questions for us is there any space for Brazil in this new roadmap of the global Britain? In the face of this scenario, it is a good time to talk about the historical relations between Brazil and UK. Ronaldo Verano has already highlighted. So it was at different times in the history of economic development, investment, and trade. United Kingdom, for example, is one of the main supporters of Brazil's candidate the OECD, and now of the policy we still have to adapt for the OECD candidature. Brazil and UK have signed a partnership that involves high British investments to reduce barriers to productivity and create conditions for growth in key sectors of Brazilian economy. And this partnership covers areas such as financial services, poverty reduction, sustainable growth, services sector, etc. So more specifically, as part of this cooperation, that is the Prosperity Fund program, we would like to highlight the Brazil Energy program. That's a 3-year program that goes to March 2023 for implementing innovative uses of clean to support. It involves partnerships with Brazilian.
Professor Paula, I'd ask you if you can close your video.
Government
Your
and
internet connection is very unstable.
Brazilian energy industry.
I think maybe you should close your video. Connection is very unstable, so we are not hearing you very well.
My video. Okay. Let's see if it's better now. It's okay. Can I continue?
As it seems better. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm gonna take this shortly. So traditionally, the energy sector has been the main focus of British interest in Brazil, and so far let's go on. So for our discussion, we couldn't have better guests than we have today. So we have Ambassador Peter Wilson with us. He's the United Kingdom ambassador to Brazil, former ambassador to the Netherlands, and former permanent representative to the Organization of the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Ambassador, thank you very much for accepting the invitation to join us today. We also have Ambassador Rubens Barbosa, the president of the Institute of International Relations and Foreign Trade, former ambassador of Brazil to London and Washington. Thank you, Ambassador. We are very pleasure to have you in this debate today with us. Thank you for accepting to participate in our webinar. And last but never least, we have Professor Andrew Hero, Montague Burton Professor of International Relations at Oxford University, and a fellow Balliol College. So Professor Hero, it is always a pleasure hearing from you, your instigating comments and views of world politics. Thank you. An information, a quick information. So although Ambassador Peter Wilson has found space on his agenda to join us, today he needs to leave the webinar about around noon. So therefore, I would like to anticipate our gratitude, Ambassador, for staying with us as much as you can. So thank you in advance. So let's go. Each guest will have about 10 to 15 minutes to deliver their talks. And we should have about 10 to 15 minutes for some questions from the audience. I'd like to remind that the participants of the webinar are very welcome to submit questions by the Q&A function on Zoom. So we will have time for questions and debate after the guest talk. So, and Ronaldo Verano can give us the final remarks at the end of our webinar. So let's start without further delays. Ambassador Peter Wilson, the floor is yours, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Carla, Professor Ronaldo, Professor Ana Paula, for that very kind introduction. And can I just say, look, it's a real pleasure to be on a panel with Ambassador Rubens Barbosa and Professor Andrew Harold. It's an honor to be on this panel with you both. I come with a health warning. So I am 3 months old. I arrived in this country on January the 22nd, and I am still learning. So for me, I find these conversations very useful because of what you all have to say, both in terms of what questions are on your minds, but also any comments that you make in the chat. So I will be looking at that very carefully as soon as I finish speaking. I also wanted to say that it's a real pleasure to be talking about this subject, but I do just want to recognize that I'm doing so at a difficult time for Brazil and for the world. Today is the day in the UK that we open up. But we're doing so very cautiously. We're concerned about the presence of the Indian variant in the UK of the coronavirus, and we are doing everything step by step, and we cannot afford to be complacent. I was in Botucatu yesterday, where Oxford AstraZeneca, the Oxford project, is conducting a huge field test of the effectiveness of the AstraZeneca vaccine against different variants of COVID, including the South African variant, which is present here, and the Kent variant, which is present here, but not the Indian variant, I'm happy to say, which is not, as far as I know, present in the population here. But that will tell us a lot about the state of the vaccine. And I think it says something very important about the cooperation between the UK and Brazil, and actually in particular about the cooperation between Oxford and Brazil, because through sharing that science, we will all learn more and be able to protect our populations better as a result, because there's no doubt that we are going to be living with versions of this virus for some time, and that we will also need to share as much knowledge as we can to confront future pandemics. But that is the kind of partnership that we want. It's good for Brazil, it's good for the UK, it's good for the world. But I don't want to make any apologies about looking ahead. I don't want to make any apologies either about talking about opportunity, because when I think about Brazil, that is the word that comes to mind most. And when I think about the UK and Brazil, that is the word that comes to mind most too, because I agree with what Ana Paula and Professor Ronaldo have said, which is that we have had a very strong relationship in the past. Since the Second World War, that has reduced, relatively speaking. And I think today is an opportunity to reset that. And the context for us, and that context that you've asked me to speak about, is obviously our exit from the European Union and the creation of a new agreement with the European Union, which allows us to continue to trade and continue to have close cooperation with our closest neighbours, which we also want. So let me just talk about what for me are the top priorities in Brazil through the prism of Brexit. I mean, the first one, and I'll put it at the top of the list because it's an example also of where we have a lot to do, is trade. So to be blunt about it, our trade with Brazil is 1% of Brazil's GDP. That used to look very different. It doesn't look great in comparison with two of our benchmark competitors. France's trade with Brazil is greater than ours. Germany's trade with Brazil is considerably greater than ours, and it's greater than per capita too, in case we're trying to make excuses for the fact that we're slightly smaller in population terms. German trade with Brazil is something like between 3 and 4 times ours. I'd also say that the Brazil market is still a relatively closed one. So when we talk about opening up trade, some of it is about us being more active, and some of it is about reducing barriers to trade between our countries. And if I take the most obvious one, and Ambassador Rubens has heard me talk about this before, so apologies, Ambassador, but a double taxation agreement between Brazil and the UK would transform our trading relationship and our investment relationship. Some estimates put it as much as a 40% increase in our trade. That's difficult to predict in advance. But when you ask companies, both present in Brazil and thinking about coming to Brazil, what is the biggest barrier to trade? A double taxation agreement is at the top of the list. And I think we can do that. We could do it now. Brazil is the biggest country in the world with whom we don't have one. And I think it is one that's, its tax is always complex, but given Brazil's own desire to enter the OECD, there are templates for doing this kind of thing that would really help Brazil achieve a membership that we are extremely clear about our support for. The other thing is, we talk often about free trade agreements, and the UK is very, very keen to do free trade agreements around the world. We are keen to do a free trade agreement of our own with Mercosur. I think for Brazil, that represents an opportunity too. There is a European Brazilian FTA on the table, held up a little bit at the moment. I am not afraid of a little competition. I think a little competition is often healthy, but we are very clear that this is something we'd like to do, as long as all members of Mercosur want to do it as well. And there is some complicated politics to resolve in Mercosur before that becomes possible. But Brazil has been the main protagonist in trying to open up Mercosur. And I think that is something that we can and must work on together. Secondly, climate. Now, climate is an issue that in the UK has dominated a huge amount of our economic as well as our environmental agenda. What we are trying to do is really transform our economy into a green economy. So when we do things like become the first country in the world to set a legal target for net zero emissions by 2050, we do it for a very simple reason. We do it to drive economic as well as environmental reform. If we don't do it, we think, and if other countries don't do it with us, we're 0.9% of global emissions. Brazil is 3% of global emissions, but Brazil does own 1/3 of the global carbon sink. When we do this, we do it not only because we think we have to in order to achieve 1.5 degrees net increase in the heat in the planet, but also because we think if we do it now and we do it early, that will have a massive advantageous effect on our economy. In other words, to put it bluntly, we do think that we can get rich by going green. And I'm absolutely convinced that Brazil, which in many, many sectors is a global leader in sustainability and a global leader in the use of renewables, Brazil also has an opportunity to do that in areas like deforestation, where at the moment its performance is less strong. And I absolutely believe that this is a shared agenda where we can help. Just to sort of put this in the Brexit context, we're not obviously part of the European Union anymore. We are president of the next big UN climate conference. And I think as a country that is European but not in the European Union, we can and should play a presidential role that brings countries together to achieve the kind of agreement that we want to achieve. And I think there's a huge amount in this for Brazil, because if we manage to achieve what we want, which is to achieve the setting of the conditions to create a global carbon market and a price for carbon, Brazil stands to benefit massively in economic terms as well as in environmental terms. So outside the European Union, nevertheless, as a European country that shares many, many objectives with our European partners, we think we have a vital convening role to play in that debate. And we really, really want to bring Brazil closer to the center of the solution in just the same way that I think President Bolsonaro sent very important signals at the Earth Summit that President Biden hosted on the 22nd of April. Brazil's announcements in that area are a significant shift, bringing forward global net zero to 2050, ending illegal deforestation by 2030, making big commitments about monitoring deforestation in the Amazon and doubling expenditure on that area. And we want to work with Brazil to realize those commitments and make them a reality. Third area, it's linked to the second area, and it's also linked to what I was talking about right at the beginning, science. Huge, huge opportunities in science. Again, Brazil, the UK trod its own path on vaccines. And I'm particularly pleased that in Brazil, the cooperation between AstraZeneca, Oxford, and Fiocruz has been excellent. This is a country where AstraZeneca is producing 20 million vaccines a month in partnership with Fiocruz, and where technology transfer has already allowed that production to take place here, and future technology transfer should allow Brazil to make its own raw materials as well, rather than being reliant on supplies from overseas. And that's really important, not just for this year, but for future years when we're going to continue to need this capability. I do just want to say that I think Oxford and AstraZeneca have been extraordinary in this, because the company is making no profit from the vaccine sales. It's doing this at cost, and it's doing it in partnership with Oxford, that believes this is a partnership that will help countries across the world. And it is the most used vaccine around the world. And preliminary laboratory evidence suggests that it is almost as effective against the so-called Brazil variant as it is against the original virus. So this is really important cooperation, but it's the tip of the iceberg for our scientific cooperation with Brazil. And in a lot of other areas, including with Embrapa and with other scientific leaders across Brazil, our scientists are keen to step up that cooperation. We are one of the few countries in the world to have a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry actually posted in Sao Paulo, That's unusual. It's there for a reason, because Brazil science is so strong. I think that's not well known in the UK, but it's an area where the people who are the most expert in their fields know it very well. And we want to create the kinds of structures that allow that kind of cooperation to flourish. It's not an immediately Brexit-related point, but it's absolutely vital for our shared future. And then finally, I want to talk just briefly about security. Security is an area where we have not had a deep relationship with Brazil in the past, but it is an area where I want to step up cooperation in the future. And I say that for tactical and strategic reasons. If you look, for example, at what the key threats that we face are, then I think Brazil and the UK have a more similar view of that than we have done perhaps for a couple of decades. When I look at the integrated review, which is the big document that the UK published earlier this year, setting out our approach to foreign and security policy for the next 2 decades, if you look at the key themes in that, these are themes on which we need to cooperate more closely with Brazil. So we are increasing significantly our investment in defense, again, in protecting ourselves against new attacks, technological attacks, cyber attacks. We're investing massively in tech more widely across the board, not just in defense, but including through our universities. And we have a very similar view, in my view, of some of the strategic challenges that we face, and that some of the strategic challenges that democracies in Institute, for the first time in a long time, if you look at the GDPs of autocracies compared to democracies, the GDPs of autocracies are now greater. That means that those of us operating in a robust democracies need to think carefully about our shared values and how we maintain those values and principles in the world in which we currently live. And I think that's a vital area of cooperation between us. So what we want, the UK wants, we say we want to be a force for good in the world. I think Brazil wants to be a force for good in the world. And we also like to describe ourselves, and Prime Minister does it in the integrated review, as a problem-solving nation. There are many, many issues in the world on which we cannot solve those problems without cooperation, and where Brazil has a key role to play, and where I believe my country has a key role to play. We can do much, much more together on the challenges that face us in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Peter Wilson, for your so important and interesting remarks. And thank you. It was extremely helpful for our discussion. We hope this was just the first time we had the privilege to have you with us, because I hope today is just the beginning of our conversation about Brazil-UK relations. So thank you so much. And please feel free if you need to leave us. However, of course, if you have some time, I would like to give you back the floor for answering one question. We don't know if you have time for that, but thank you in advance. So, and now it is a great privilege to turn over to Ambassador Rubens Barbosa. Good. Thank you, Ambassador. So, Ambassador Rubens Barbosa, please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It is a great pleasure to discuss again UK-Brazil relationship. I had great fun and happiness when I was twice in Britain. And I followed very close, I continue to follow very close what I experienced during my stay in London. I think that Ambassador Peter mentioned the areas, the main areas in which there will be agreement in prioritizing the relationship. Trade, environment, science are, of course, important areas. I would add given the situation in Brazil, and thinking in a medium and long-term basis. I think that I should have started saying this. I think that when we analyze UK-Brazil relationship, we should take a medium long-term approach. We're living this year and next year, the last 2 years of a government that was very unusual with their views of the world, with their priorities. So I think that we should take a longer term approach. Of course, trade and climate change are two of the major areas of possible cooperation. But I think that from a practical point of view, we should also take into consideration the question of innovation and possible cooperation among startups. Brazil has several poles where startups are beginning to develop business very creatively. And I think it is the case to UK have a look, UK companies have a look on this, because this is a real possibility in the future with 5G, with artificial intelligence, new areas, and I think also that UK and Brazil could strengthen their cooperation in third markets, not only here in South America, but also in Africa, in other areas where we could jointly develop programs of cooperation with local communities. I think that we should have a more closer attention to the trade agreement. I understand that that UK has already signed around over 20 agreements, and several others in negotiation. I remember that the former Prime Minister, Theresa, she was the first to mention UK interest in negotiating an agreement with a trade agreement with Brazil. It's not easy. UK priorities are others are looking elsewhere. I don't think that we'll have a trade agreement negotiation soon. I don't have any information, but then my feeling is that like the United States, people here like to speak about US-Brazil trade agreement. I'm very skeptical about this. And in the case of the United Kingdom, I think that if we started, it would be fine, because we are complementary economies. And so it's a pity that UK has already negotiated over 20 agreements, and including with some here in the region. And Mercosur is, according to the information I have, is not high in the priorities. There is another area that perhaps Ambassador could consider. You know that Brazilian industry is falling several positions in the world, and it is lagging behind in terms of industrialization. The advances 4.0, only 10-15% of the industry here. are in this category. I think that in some areas, perhaps UK companies could explore some association, joint ventures with Brazilian companies to increase their share in the market. If they don't have a presence in Brazil, they could expand to Brazil and to South America. Perhaps this would be a win-win situation. Of course, some studies should be developed, should be made in order to select a few areas in which UK companies are state-of-the-art and Brazilian companies are lagging behind, with the idea to join efforts to upgrade the capacity of production here in Brazil to produce better products, more efficient products to the domestic market, and to expand to South America, where the UK company has not set a foot on. So there are many opportunities that I think are not explored. We appreciate that for the last 2 or 3 years, Britain has been involved in very difficult negotiations, looking inward. But now, with almost everything settled, Britain wants to be global Britain. So has to do something to expand its ties. In the case of Brazil, as you know, we are negotiating with the European Union, but our focus, the focus of Brazilian companies, are elsewhere. Asia became our major market. Not only China, but other countries in the region are expanding. And for the next few years, I think that especially agricultural products will have in Asia its major partner. The United States is the second, lagging behind. But China and Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Singapore are high in our priorities. We are beginning to discuss with them trade agreements. And I favor very much that Brazil should join the TPP, the former TPP, because this would open up markets for Brazilian products and could compete with the RCEP, the Chinese free trade agreement. So I think that there are many things to do. I think that technical cooperation among technical companies, like you mentioned, Embrapa, and companies in the UK, other areas should be developed. I think that the double taxation agreement should be encouraged. When I was ambassador to London 25 years ago, I discussed this, and I encouraged Brazilian government to. Pedro Malan was the finance minister. I told him, look, we have to negotiate a double taxation agreement, but until today we don't have the agreement. So it's complicated. As far as trade agreement with Britain is concerned, the main concern that we have is that if and when we negotiate this agreement, we have to make sure that agricultural quotas that we had with European Union should be included in the negotiations. And because we lost, when Britain left the European Union, we lost quotas, egg quotas. So this is a point whenever we start discussing with Britain. This is a point that we will request. And finally, I would mention opportunities for investment. I know that the environment for business in Brazil are not that good at this moment. But if you think ahead, as I said, you have to, in the case of Brazil, to think ahead. And I like to think in 10 years' time, 2020, 2030. And the opportunities for investment for UK companies or UK banks to finance those investments are huge, UK companies are in the oil and gas, renewable energy, but there are new areas in which I know that you had capability in sanitation, for instance, and other services. I think that this area is not very much explored unless these 2 or 3 areas. But there are, the country is opening gradually, and that's why I stress the tactic to look into this relationship on a longer term basis. You have to start with sometimes. And I like to say that many foreign companies, Italian companies or German companies, they started in period of crisis, and they succeeded. When the country improved, they became big companies here. Brazil is not in a crisis. It is in a difficult situation like many other countries due to the health conditions, the pandemic. But I think that in some aspects, the situation is not favorable for investor to do business here. But this will be overcome. And in a year and a half, we'll have an election. Who knows what happens? If the government changes, then we'll have a new area of opportunities, and we should have a look on opportunities, not current opportunities, but opportunities of a longer duration, opportunities for the future, not only in the traditional areas, but in new areas, like 5G, like artificial intelligence, new materials. I mean, a number of other opportunities that will be the future of trade. We should not concentrate on the traditional trade, but we should embark on negotiations, on discussions, on selecting opportunities for the coming 5-10 years. United Kingdom was very good at that, and Brazil should do this to have a good partnership in Europe, including the United Kingdom. So I think that I'm very optimistic about the coming years in Brazil, despite the fact that we are passing a difficult moment. But I bet that Brazil in 2 or 3 years will be in a better shape than today. I am confident that the economy based on export and on sound economic, macroeconomic policies, as you see, if you look into all the major indicators of the economy in Brazil, they are good. The problem we have is the instability in the world, instability in Brazil, the political instability, and the difficulties the government has to make the right decisions. Otherwise, all the numbers you get are normal. You know, the reserves, the surplus in trade, the growth. Inflation has increased a bit, but it's not out of control. Exchange rates. We are in a better situation. The last point I want to make relates to trade, to climate and environment. We know that Britain is passing a legislation that at the end will restrict foreign products coming from areas in which forests are destroyed. This legislation is made especially aiming at Brazil. And well, there are tropical forests in Asia, in Africa, but the rhetoric is mainly direct to Brazil. I don't think it's a wrong way to discuss this. You have to enter into a position of strength, and it's up to us to correct the illicit practices in the Amazon. It's a Brazilian problem. It's not a foreign problem. But I don't think that we'll finish with this question with the current government. That's why I'm stressing the medium and long-term basis for discussion. If you take only the current situation, probably it will be immobilized and you lose opportunities because others are doing. Chinese, Koreans, Asian countries are beginning to invest here in sizable way. So I'm looking into other opportunities, even India, no? So traditional partners, if they are reluctant to look into medium and long-term basis, the opportunities here in Brazil, will lose the opportunities. So I think that Brazil, after the pandemic, will build bridges, will surpass all the difficulties, especially if a new government is elected. So I don't think that we'll have many difficulties as we are experiencing now, because once the health situation improves and Brazil comes back to normality, there we know that there are many projects that will go forward, and with the push that we'll have from the United States growth and from the growth in India, our foreign trade will increase. Perhaps our products will increase in those markets, and the balance of payments here will be on a safe side. So I don't see any risk, immediate risk, that could lead any country to avoid doing business in Brazil, waiting the election, for instance. I think that you should start doing research, identifying opportunities now, and once the election comes, you're ready to develop further business on a safer basis. I finished here commenting on Ambassador Peter's comments. Thank you.
Well,
thank you, Ambassador Rubens Barbosa. Very inspiring words. So I'm sure. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm sure we will have questions and thoughts about your perspectives of potential agreements and opportunities. Thank you so much. With that, let me give now the floor to Professor Andrew Hurrell, please.
Thank you very much indeed for the invitation to speak and to join this panel. My two previous speakers are far more closely engaged in the realities of Brazil-UK relations. What I want to do is to pick up actually a theme that they've both mentioned, which is the need to see this relationship in a longer term perspective, to look back and also to look ahead. We have, of course, been here before. I probably can't remember how many panels, not as many as Ambassador Barbosa, but many panels, many roundtables on UK Brazilian relations over the years. And it's fair to say that in many of them, expectations have been raised that have not subsequently been met. It has been a long road of often unmet expectations. So for the academic, standing back, looking at the relationship, one very obvious question to ask is, what has changed? What is there in a sense, the big picture, in the way the world is looking, the way the world might be going, that creates conditions, different sets of conditions for the two countries to look at each other differently and perhaps to do different things together. And I think there are certainly a number of very important factors that one can point to, which genuinely do create something different and the potential for a different kind of dialogue and perhaps relationship. So what has changed? Well, three sort of big things, if you like. The first has been around for the past 20, 25 years, which is, of course, the post-Western character of a changed global order. This has become a cliche, but just let me make a couple of points about it. There's a sort of tendency for people who write about emerging powers, post-Western order, to kind of conduct a short-term sort of box-ticking exercise. You know, 1 minute, yes, Brazil ticks these boxes. Brazil is on the front page of The Economist. Brazil is ready to take off. Then that changes, then India changes. And this kind of exercise in order to kind of see where we are. It's, I think, really important to step back from that and to see the shift to a different kind of post-Western global order as a long-term, a very long-term shift that was in a way distorted by the very strange conditions of the post-Cold War world. It's a long-term move in which a different kind of capacity, a different kind of diffusion, what I call political agency rather than political power, has taken place. That is really of profound importance for thinking about almost any problem in the 21st century. Of course, this is to do with China, but it's not only to do with China. Of course, it's to do with emerging powers, but it's not only to do with emerging powers. It has as much to do with the capacity of societies, of peoples, of individuals to mobilize on the streets of Sao Paulo or Cairo or Ankara as it does with countries and their foreign policy and their diplomacy. Secondly, and not unrelated, for the first time in probably several hundred years, Europe is a secondary region of the global system. It was at the core of the system, obviously, right through the imperial period. It lost a great deal of its imperial power through what Eric Hobsbawm calls the great civil wars and upheavals of the first half of the 20th century. But it remained central through the Cold War years, partly because of the nature of the strategic balance, but also because of that crucial set of decisions that the United States took in 1936 and 1937 to make Europe first the center of its foreign policy. And of course, the meaning of the pivot to Asia is the end of that period in how America sees and approaches the world. Again, the illusion of the post-Cold War period was that the transatlantic world, the transatlantic liberal world, was the center, because it had all of the answers as to how the problems of the 21st century were going to be solved. We know now that that again was a period in time that is now over. And the third change is, well, maybe not so much a change, it's a way in which a pattern of relations works out, has to do with where Brazil is in the world and Brazil in the Western Hemisphere. Everyone, of course, easily talks about the United States and the power of the United States in the region. But the really interesting thing about the US and the region, at least for me, has always been that the United States has had immense discretion not to become too involved in the region. And of course, that for Brazil is fundamentally a good thing. And Brazil is not, Latin America is not now, and is not likely to be, again in the foreseeable future, a particular priority for the United States. When Brazil has sought to make US policy the center of its foreign policy in the 1940s, the late 60s, 1970s, it has not been a particularly good thing. So those three changes, big structural changes, I think place Brazil in a very different kind of world where they're facing together enormous challenges, challenges that link old and new. Old, the return of geopolitics, geoeconomics, the return of hard power, the return of nuclear issues, hard security issues, intervention, coercion, alongside new forms of hybrid warfare. All of the old stuff that people thought had gone away has obviously come back, but combined with the new world, not just of globalization. We can sort of debate how much decoupling there is, but that's not the essential point. The essential point is the degree to which we are all, and certainly these two countries, bound up in a complex global system for whom nobody on their own has the answers as to how that system should best be managed. And whether it's pandemics or whether it's climate change, that notion of systemic complexity, where there aren't simple answers and where people can only find answers by recognizing what they don't know and collaborating with others, seems to me of fundamental importance. I think I say vulnerability because I do think the two countries find themselves in a vulnerable situation, maybe more vulnerable than they had before. Brexit has, at least from my perspective, represented a fundamental loss and a challenge to Britain's power in the world. And this global scenario creates opportunities for Brazil, but also leaves Brazil potentially vulnerable. So finding shared answers, I think, is immensely important in science, and I would entirely concur with what Ambassador Wilson said. I would, as I probably could be expected to, is to say that it's not just science. Of course, everybody wants to talk about STEM, everyone wants to talk about hard science, but in area after area, we actually know quite a lot on the science side. That's not the problem. What we have to do is to build shared understandings of how those scientific answers are going to be translated into political and social outcomes. And that needs science, but it also needs a great deal of cooperation in humanities and social science. So what does this all mean in terms of the relationship? Well, Britain and Brazil in their different ways have had a powerful and I think very impressive tradition of pragmatism in their foreign policy. In both countries, that tradition of pragmatism has been challenged both by polarization, political polarization at home, and by the intrusion of different forms of ideology into that foreign policy. I concur with what I think Ambassador Barbosa was suggesting, that over the longer term, we're likely to see, certainly in Brazil, a re-emergence of a more traditional form of Brazilian pragmatism. And I hope very much that we will see the same in the case of the United Kingdom. Where and how does this cash out? Well, for me, I've got 3 quick points to make and then I'll stop. In one negative way and 2 positive ways. The negative way, and here I'll come to a moment when I'll agree with Ambassador Wilson on the security side, but on the negative side, I have a different perspective in terms of alliances of liberal democracies. I think that a pragmatic approach on the part both of these countries, but also of other countries in the world, a alliance, a coalition, viewing the world in terms of a divide between democracies and authoritarian autocracies, authoritarian regimes, has always been a problematic thing. And I think it remains a problematic way of thinking about the world and thinking about foreign policy. Why? Because it risks being self-enforcing. Why? Secondly, because if you want to solve the problems of a global world, whether the old problems of geopolitics or the new problems of systemic complexity, you need all of those who are most necessary for a solution to be there around the table as legitimate players. Legitimate in that thin, old-fashioned Kissingerian sense, where there is some minimal agreement on what you're all doing around the table and on the need to search for some common solution, even if a negative one, not doing too much harm to each other. So reinforcing divides between democracies and autocracies is not helpful. And of course, thirdly, it is very difficult to work out who should be on which side. One of the other areas where we share vulnerability is in the extent to which even well-established democracies are under challenge and are flawed. Who should be on which side? Why? What conceivable grounds is there for the United Kingdom seeking close relations with India? On many, many grounds, yes, but not on the grounds of a shared notion of democracy. Britain and Brazil both face challenges for democracy, and I think there's good grounds for trying mutually to understand what those challenges are and how they can best be faced and taken forward. There is, again, another way. We used to always, when I sort of grew up intellectually, it was always, well, here is the United States, here is Europe, here is the developing world. What is it that these countries can learn from the established democracies, whether in terms of economic development or in terms of political organization? I think we're in a different kind of world, again, a world where we all need to learn from each other about the problems that democracies face at different stages of their social and economic trajectory. So that, if you like, it's not a negative one, because I think there too, there's something positive, but I would guard against any notion of a rigid divide or alliances or coalitions. The other 2 points, my 2 final points. On the geopolitical side, neither Brazil nor the United Kingdom are really central players, but there's a great deal that both can do in and around particularly, not just formal institutions, but Brazil has a rich diplomatic history of playing an active role, taking, if you like, the hard edge off some of the harder conflicts in the world. And I think together with Britain, building around some of those areas of security cooperation that the ambassador mentioned, there is much there that is likely to develop in the future. And then finally, the shared global challenges, which is where I think health, climate, energy all live. I mean, there's obviously a great deal there. I think we need sometimes to step a little bit further back from the immediate possibilities of cooperation and actually ask about some of the issues that have already come up here. We need to have some shared understanding, for example, about the conditionality of trade flows and the conditionality of sovereignty. In the post-Cold War world, it was very easy for Western countries, transatlantic countries, to talk about, well, you're not being responsible, we must make your sovereignty conditional on better behavior, whether human rights, whether environment. We need, in a sense, to get away from that, to recognize, of course, that there has to be shared restraint on the part of all countries, shared restraint around, to bring forth and bring back a very old idea, notions of common heritage, in order to build a productive relationship. And that clearly, I think, has to be part of how the question of the rainforests and so on, other environmental resources are thought about. But on the other side, any green global deal needs to involve very large transfers of finance from rich to poor. It needs to involve very large transfers of technology, and it needs to involve this shared engagement in what the implementation of a green policy might be. So there is, I think, scope for renewed bargains, but there is a need to face up to what has to come from the core countries of the industrialized world to the emerging world if that's going to work. And of course, cuts in British aid have not helped that. In some ways, they've diverted attention from the fact that green global deals will require those sorts of transfers, massively larger than the cuts that have recently taken place. Just as in the pandemic, we argue about intellectual property, but we need to recognize that we need solutions on intellectual property. We need solutions on technological transfer. We need solutions on transferring vaccines. All of those things have to go together if we find answers to global challenges. So I actually, despite my rather gloomy view of the world, I think that there are many things that push the United Kingdom and Brazil together in their joint search for a different kind of relationship in the 21st century. Thank you.
May I speak?
For sure, Ambassador. Thank you, Professor Harrell.
I want to say make two comments. First, on the statement that Andrew made about the involvement, the lesser involvement of the United States in the region, in South America, and that Brazil would fill the gap. This was the case at the beginning, 20 years ago. But recently, Brazil has lost these opportunities, and the gap was filled by China. The problem, in my view, is that the United States has lost interest in the region because there's no threat. Not even Venezuela is a threat to the United States. Companies are doing business elsewhere, China, Asia. They are not attracted by the conditions here. You had difficult political situations in several countries in the region. So Brazil lost its force, strength in industry, and we don't create opportunities to develop a global chains of production, supply chains, which we should, not to speak in political terms. So the point is that, yes, the United States lost its stance here in the region, is less attracted. Brazil has not filled the gap, and China today is the leading or number 2 trading partner to all Latin American countries or South American countries. Even now in Argentina, the major Mercosur partner to Brazil, China is taking over Brazil. So it's a very complicated situation. I hope that with the new government, the interest of Brazilian companies to the region will increase again, because we are 400 million people. It's a huge market. Why to leave this only to China, having Brazil a sizable industrial group of companies? This is one point. The second point, when Harold said that the world is divided, and I understood that he implied that the division would be between democratic countries and autocratic countries. I think that to countries like Brazil, this has no interest. We shouldn't abide by this definition. Like in Europe, Merkel is against this as well. Yep. So we have to do, in the case of Brazil, we had to do as President Trump said, Brazil in the first place. Brazil comes first. So we have to decide. We have to decide when there is a divide, and we are, you know, that we are at the beginning of a long dispute between China and the United States for the next 5-6 decades. So it's not the case. It's not. We shouldn't take a stance today in one side or in another side. At the beginning, 5G is the first case. So we have to decide according to our own interest. Sometimes we would go with the United States. In some cases we go with China. This is the normal thing. Brazil, at the beginning of this government, decided to totally align with the United States. It was wrong.
Yeah.
And
that was exactly my point.
Yeah, we were wrong-footed because when Trump left and Biden came, our rhetoric, our narrative had to change. So there are concrete interests that will affect countries around the world, and loyalty by one side or by the requested by one side or requested by others. In the case of Brazil, at least, I think they should not prevail. We should discuss issue by issue according to our national interest without taking into consideration any party or any geopolitical consideration. Just these two comments.
If I could just quickly absolutely agree, because that was my point about the need to avoid that kind of view of a division. And on the first point, again, I very much agree. I wasn't suggesting that there was this Brazil and South America. I was simply suggesting that there was this gap and that this created a space and opportunity for Brazil, including globally. So I would agree with both of those points.
So, so thank you so much. Amazing. I'm so happy that, we are out of time. So that means that you need another one. We need another, webinar on the relationships between Brazil and UK. I'd like to say that, very kindly, Ambassador Peter Wilson answered a few questions in our chat. So I would love to bring these questions and answers to us but however, I am concerning about the time. I'm so sorry. I would have my own questions for the guests. However, we have to call Ronaldo for his final remarks, and I would like once more to thank you, our privilege, being here. And I really think that we need to have another webinar on these topics, because we have so much to talk about that. So Ronaldo, please.
Thank you, and I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to run. I'm terribly late.
Oh,
I just simply wanted to say thank you to all of you. I found this a very interesting conversation. Just to pick up one thing, which is to say, Ambassador Barbosa used a very useful word, which is complementary. It doesn't mean identical. It means that we have interests in common, and I think they're increasingly in common. I think there is a big argument to be had about the geopolitics of all of this. My own view is that all of us, again, have to be just a little bit clearer in a world where there is a lot of turmoil about where we stand. And obviously it's my job to bring us as close together as we possibly can. But that's done with a huge amount of respect for both different interests and different diplomatic traditions. I firmly believe that there is progress that can be made with the current government in Brazil. We have a good relationship with the government, and we will have a good relationship with future governments, because it's in our interest to do so, but also because I fundamentally believe that we do actually, at our core, share some common values. So I just wanted to say that, and to say it's been an honor to be part of this panel. I've learned a lot from the other two panelists, and I look forward to doing this again. Thank you so much, and sorry to run.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm so sorry I didn't see you, because I can't see the whole screen, because I'm using my cell phone because of my connection. So I'm so sorry I didn't see you. I thought that you had left. Okay, so sorry. Thank you, Professor Harrow. Thank you, Ambassador Rubens Barbosa. Thank you again, Ambassador Peter Wilson. I'm gonna pass the floor now to Ronaldo, please. Bye-bye.
Então, muito obrigado.
Muito obrigada. Ronaldo's gonna give the final remarks.
Yes.
Ronaldo is there? Okay.
It was a fascinating morning. We could stay here much longer debating some of these points that were very well made. But I think what comes out of this discussion is that there is a lot of room for both Brazil and the UK to explore new opportunities in trade, in investment. And I think both ambassadors, Ambassador Peter Wilson and Ambassador Rubens Barbosa, pointed out some of the areas which are more susceptible to immediate cooperation. I think trade, science, climate, and defense, I think, are very good ideas. And I think that it's a propitious moment for us to explore these opportunities. Obviously, there are going to be difficulties. It's not easy to negotiate a trade agreement. It's not easy to implement these things from one day to the other. But I think we have to start someplace. And I think both the UK and Brazil stand to gain if they do this in an objective and rapid fashion. I think Professor Andrew Hurrell mentioned the problems that the global difficulties present. It was a very, very good talk that he gave on some of the challenges that the global community faces. But I think cooperation is the main component of today's international relations. I think that, as pointed out by Rubens Barbosa, we have to obviously look at Brazil's interest, but we also have to look at a greater cooperation, because there is no single nation that can solve all these problems by itself. I think that nations get together and put their best minds to think about possible solutions to some of these problems, we are not going to get in. But I think the suggestion of having a future event to further discuss these issues, it's a very good one. And I hope that the CEBRl will be able to accommodate that. I want to thank very, very much Ambassador Peter Wilson, Ambassador Rubens Barbosa, and Professor Hurrell for joining us this morning. And I want to thank our audience for being so patient, and apologize for not being able to take on the questions because we ran a little bit out of time. But maybe next time we'll be more efficient in managing time. Thank you very much, and we'll see you at a next meeting of the Europe Group of CEBRl. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.